The night was heavy with a palpable tension, as if the very air itself held its breath, awaiting the moment when everything would either come together or fall apart. For weeks now, Zane had wrestled with the truth of what he had become: a creature of the night, a vampire. It had started so suddenly, a bite that should have been fatal, but instead it unlocked a part of him that had lain dormant, a part that had altered his existence forever. At first, there had been denial. How could this happen to someone like him? Someone who had led a simple, normal life. But the thirst, the growing strength, and the ever-present pull toward the shadows were undeniable. He wasn't human anymore, not in the way he used to be. Standing before the cracked mirror in his dimly lit room, Zane studied his reflection. His once vibrant, tanned skin was now ghostly pale. His eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and his heart, once the source of all life, no longer beat. He could feel the beast within clawing at the edges of his sanity, demanding to be unleashed. The old, abandoned cathedral, where he now found himself, was far from the comforting familiarity of his home. It was here, in this cold, crumbling sanctuary, that Zane had been called to meet an ancient vampire elder, a being who claimed to hold the answers to his internal war. The elder, a figure shrouded in mystery and menace, appeared out of the shadows, as if the darkness itself had willed him into existence. His voice was smooth, almost hypnotic, as he spoke to Zane, offering him power beyond comprehension, immortality that came with no boundaries, no human weaknesses. But there was a price. The elder made it clear, to fully embrace his vampire nature, Zane would have to sever all ties with his human past. No more friends, no more family, no more love, only the eternal night, and the blood that sustained him. Zane listened in silence, his mind racing. The promise of freedom from the constant struggle was alluring, but the cost was staggering. He thought of his best friend, Jess, who had stood by his side even when everything started to fall apart, even when he became distant, erratic, and unpredictable. Jess didn't know the full truth, but she knew enough to understand that Zane was going through something dark and dangerous. How could he walk away from her? How could he turn his back on the last piece of his humanity? Before Zane could respond to the elder's tempting offer, a sudden flare of light interrupted their exchange. The ancient vampire hissed, retreating into the shadows, as Zane's allies stormed into the cathedral. Jess was among them, her face pale but resolute. She had come for him, risking everything to stand by his side one last time. Zane's heart, if it still functioned, would have ached at the sight of her, knowing that his very presence put her in danger. But there was no time for explanations, no time for goodbyes. The battle had begun. Outside, the storm that had been brewing all night unleashed its fury. Thunder rumbled in the distance as the vampire lord, a creature even more fearsome than the elder, descended upon the town with his legion of shadowy minions. The peaceful streets were now a battleground, and Zane, despite his fears and uncertainties, knew he had a role to play. Do you really think you can stand against me? You're weak, still clinging to your humanity. Zane felt the rage rise within him, fueled by the vampire lord's taunts and the sight of his town being torn apart. For too long, he had been afraid of his own strength, afraid of what he might become if he fully embraced the monster inside him. But now, in the midst of this chaos, he realized something important. He didn't have to choose between being a vampire or being human. He could be both. The battle was over, but the aftermath was only beginning. The dust settled. Zane stood among the ruins of the town, his body trembling with exhaustion. Jess approached him cautiously, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and relief. She had seen what he could do, seen the raw power he held within him, but she didn't run. Instead, she reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "You're still you, Zane," she said softly, her voice steady despite everything they had been through. "No matter what happens, you're still you." Zane didn't know what the future held. He knew the thirst would never leave him, that he would always be a vampire, forever walking the fine line between the light and the darkness. But as the first rays of dawn began to break through the clouds, he realized that his journey wasn't about escaping what he had become. It was about learning to live with it. He would find a way to balance the monster inside with the person he used to be. And maybe, just maybe, he could still find a way to protect the ones he loved. With one last glance at the rising sun, Zane turned toward the future, ready to face whatever came next.